Ukraine's prosecution service, corruption's greatest ally, with Vitaly Kasko, former Deputy Prosecutor General. Netherlands decides yes or no on Ukraine, with Laura Starink, a Dutch journalist. Eastern Europe's corrupt offshore wealth revealed, with Sullivan, editor of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Bild reveals secret Russian plans for a Donbas government, with Julian Ropcke, Bild politics editor. And finally, Nagorno-Karabakh Heats Up, with Stepan Grigoryan, an Armenian analyst, and Arzu Gibilyayev, an Azerbaijani independent journalist, tonight on Hromadske.
Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is the Sunday show on Hromadske International, the only primetime show explaining Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I am Natalia Humenyuk.
And I'm Josh Kovensky, a reporter at the Kyiv Post. Tonight we have a great show lined up for you. We're going to go into depth on the recent outbreak and fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh. We're going to help break news with the OCCRP's massive leak of documents evidencing offshore accounts of world leaders, including Vladimir Putin and Petro Poroshenko. We're going to go into depth as well on the upcoming referendum in Holland, and we're going to talk about Bild's recent investigation into the Donbas government, in which they showed documents showing Russia's plans to create its own government there.
But we really would like to bring you attention what would be a lot discussed in our show. There is already this hashtag Panama Papers. So Hromadske had joined the Organization for the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting, OCCRP there. Now there is a breaking news on the leaders of many states. We currently know about the politicians involved in Russia, Spain, Serbia, Armenia, and many others. 11 million documents had been investigated, and we found what is connected to the offshore banking of these politicians. We will talk later with the representative of the OCCRP, but and it's happening all now, so we'll discuss that a bit sooner. But what is also new that in 1 hour, Hromadske would also broadcast a video investigation. We are the only one who doing the video report, which are also explaining what is the connection to the offshore, and it's also about the offshore assets of the Ukrainian President Poroshenko. So there is a bit of an embargo, so follow us and you'll learn more during this evening. And I remind that you can download our podcast on Mixcloud, so listen to all the stories, and please go also to our web page.
We'll rejoin you in a second with a segment about Nagorno-Karabakh.
I think it was. Fighting erupted between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the contested Caucasus region of Nagorno-Karabakh yesterday. There are living 18 Armenian and 12 Azerbaijani soldiers dead, but there are very conflict reporting on the killed and wounded. There are much more information about the people, but it's really hard to find the information.
And I mean, all this was really just happening yesterday, so it's hard to tell. But we can give you some background on the historical situation. It's Nagorno-Karabakh is an unrecognized state, or rather enclave. It used to belong to Azerbaijan, but it's majority ethnically Armenian, and it's an enclave surrounded on all sides by Azerbaijan. You can see from the map on the screen. There are around 140,000 people who are living there. Again, they're mostly ethnic Armenians, and it's really been a frozen conflict since the early 1990s.
But what is important to understand that the war in Nagorno-Karabakh, it was very severe in early 90s and ended up in 1994. And what's special, and there were always within this last 20 years, it's considered to be frozen conflict, but there is sometimes some spikes of violence.
And this has been the largest spike in violence since the war ended.
And what they say that's the first time since then there was all full of scale of equipment used, the mortars and all that kind. So currently we have the ceasefire. What is also important to mention that both presidents of Azerbaijan and Armenia had been to the United States for the nuclear summit.
Right.
They were meeting Vice President Biden and State Secretary Kerry, but they didn't meet. So that is kind of the background of this event. But what we've done, we definitely talked to the colleagues and analysts. I'll also stress an independent analyst and independent journalist from Armenia and Azerbaijan. So currently you can hear the what we have heard from Yerevan, from the capital of Armenia. And now we have with us from Yerevan, Armenia, Stepan Grigoryan, who is the chairman of the Analytical Center on Globalization and Regional Cooperation, to discuss what's happening there and what's happening in Karabakh. Stepan, thanks a lot for being with us. And really, what are the recent news? And I know you are in touch with people in Karabakh. So what is the situation there?
Now, current situation is very tension. Very hard, I say so. Periodically, we can see the ceasefire violation examples. But when we spoke yesterday, I want to say about yesterday's situation. Yesterday was a real war. Azerbaijani war against Karabakh. Today's situation is closer with ceasefire violation process. It's better than was, but not enough to finish this tension situation.
So the Armenian government says that the Azerbaijani claims that they are not fighting any longer, while the Armenian government says it's not correct. What would you say on that?
I want to say that in so type difficult situation, all sides blames each other, criticize each other. Really is very tension situation. And if we want to understand situation, it will be need to do some analysis. Who wanted to start this process, who was yesterday very close with war? Azerbaijani. Why Azerbaijan? Azerbaijan is very difficult situation. Azerbaijan wants to show the big powers in the world that Karabakh issue is not resolved. You know about Syria issue, about Ukraine problems connected with Russia aggression against Crimea, and so on. Why the Karabakh issue, in a compare of these two big issues, are small, but Azerbaijan wants to refresh situation, wants to say the world. It will be need to resolve this. In the same cases, Azerbaijan rejected to resolve snipers issues, who is very sensitive for all of us, and other issues. Why situation is hard, and started this, unfortunately so, the Azerbaijan side.
But Stepan, then what would be also the Armenian government, not a benefit, but at least something? How can they use this, and how can they, work with that? What could be their answer? What is their position?
No, official position is so that official Yerevans, we are agree to continue or restart negotiation process. We are agree with Minsk group's co-chairman's proposals. Many proposals arise the Minsk group in these last days. We are agree to continue negotiation process in the framework of Madrid principles, who includes all issues who arises Azerbaijan. But officially is so situation. In society, we arise and another issues. For instance, we arise issue why our government was not ready to so type development in Karabakh region. Why? You know about yesterday situation when used Azerbaijan tanks, helicopters, and Azerbaijan, acknowledged that we shut down 2 tanks and 1 helicopter. It means the situation was very hard. But why is what not predictable for us? We arise this issue, but in any cases, it will be need to block this process, these developments, very negative development. It will be need to stop, and after that, restart some new positive tendencies, new positive processes.
It's very important for us also to know, because there is a very dubious information about the figures, numbers, casualties among the military and civilians. What will you know? Because somebody says there are 200 people who had been died from the Azerbaijani side. We're speaking about the military, then there is a denial, there are the civilian casualties. What we know so far?
Unfortunately, unfortunately, when started this process, Azerbaijan, they started this process, they pushed or fighting not only against the Karabakh army, but in the same time against civilians. Died one 12-year-old boy. Unfortunately, so, and we have many died soldiers, big number. In Azerbaijan cases,
when you speak about a big number, it's how many? A dozen? Because I understand it's not confirmed, but
officially, our government says, and Karabakh said about 18.
Okay.
18 soldiers, but in any cases, in Armenia cases, our military, the defense minister is a little open. Why we don't say this is the final number, but we believe that this number is very close with the reality. In Azerbaijani cases, you know, they close now the mass media's possibilities or limited. Why? Difficult to say how many Azerbaijanians, but on Armenian TV I saw yesterday very big number killed Azerbaijani soldiers. Unfortunately, his situation is very bad. Unfortunately, so, but big numbers. They saw us the tanks, Azerbaijani tanks, who we shot down, and yes, big numbers, and from Azerbaijani side.
And Stepan, so also we hear often that sometimes from time to time about escalation in the region. It's an old frozen conflict, and but we've also read that there was something more significant happening, something compared to how it was in the end of the war in 1994. Can you please shortly put into the context what is happening compared to all the others cases of this kind of escalations?
Process of clashing process, this whole process was very similar as was the war in 92-94. Very similar. We can say was 1 day, but was war. Was not a violence process. The sides used heavy weapons, use tanks, use aviations. Why? I want to say that situation is very terrible, very serious.
When we speak also about Karabakh, it's always, there are a lot of different sides. We often hear about the Russian influence on the region. It's definitely there in connection to the Azerbaijan and to Armenia. There were both the leaders of those republics traveling to the United States at the same time. There is always a lot of accusation on Turkey, which has a very complicated relations with Armenia and is supporting Azerbaijan. So what is on stake? What are the roles of these regional partners? Russia, Turkey, and probably somebody else you'd like to mention.
Unfortunately, this last, I speak about last 2 or 3 years, Turkish role is not so constructive. Why? Turkey every time criticizes only Armenia and helps only Azerbaijan. And so type one-side policy is not useful for resolution of Karabakh issue. And yesterday they did a statement and criticized only Armenian side. But strange was. But Russia's policy is difficult. You know better that Russia, difficult to say what that aims has today. Russia connected with Karabakh officially. They say we are ready to help us. Russia is co-chairman and so on. But different versions we listened. Maybe Russia wants to protect Azerbaijanians' membership in the Eurasian Union. Maybe Russia is now closer with Azerbaijan, not with Armenia, and so on. Many versions. But in any cases, I am, as an expert, I want to say I am sure that this initiative to start war situation, hard situation in Karabakh comes from Ilham Aliyev. Unfortunately, so Azerbaijan today has many different problems connected with human rights, with oil prices who diminished quickly, hardly, and so on. Maybe this whole situation did so that Aliyev risked to start this tension situation, to start this, no, I don't say full war, but a situation who is very close with war.
Okay, thanks a lot. That was Stepan Grigoryan, the chairman of the Analytical Center on Globalization and Regional Cooperation, talking with us from Yerevan, Armenia.
So that was Stepan Grigoryan, an analyst, an Armenian analyst. And so now we're going to show you an interview I did earlier today with Arzu Gebula. She's an independent Azerbaijani journalist to get another perspective on the new fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, Azerbaijan has declared this so-called unilateral ceasefire. I mean, as far as you can tell, are there more, I suppose, ceasefire violations you could say from the Azeri side or from the Armenian side?
There have been mutual ceasefire violations. In one of the statements that came out today, the Ministry of Defense said that the Armenian side violated the ceasefire 130 times. Similar statements are coming from the Armenian side on the violation of ceasefire by the Azerbaijani side. I think if you compare, and from my conversations with experts yesterday, there is a general feeling that Azerbaijan has a tendency to violate the ceasefire first. Precisely because its territories are occupied, and that there is obviously resentment on the side of Azerbaijani government. But yeah, it's if you compare, I think they're mutually responsible.
And I mean, you know, it's clear that there have been tensions here for years, but has anything specific happened in the past couple weeks or past few months that have really led up to what happened yesterday?
That's the thing. Unlike other occasions, there's been no sort of political discussion or event that could have possibly led to this. It could be that it's just that time of the year. It's spring. Usually ceasefire violations in this context. I mean, if you remember last summer, again, it was during the summer that there were serious ceasefire violations. So it could be just the timing, because otherwise it's really difficult to make sense, especially when President Aliyev and President Sargsyan were in D.C. for the Nuclear and Security Summit, and all of this happening in their absence is slightly, it raises some questions, of course.
Sure. And I mean, have you heard, is there any sense, or could you explain, I mean, in terms of like sheer events, like how exactly this began? I mean, who fired the first bullet? Who saw who, what happened?
Well, yesterday, at first reports, they were coming in from the villages that are really close to the ceasefire line, to the front line. There were reports that a shell from the Armenian side dropped into a home of Azerbaijani family, killing the father and blowing up the legs of the son. The son later was reported dead. But then on the Armenian side, there were reports that Azerbaijan began the fire first. So I would not dwell on who began the firing first, but I would just focus on what happened. Pretty much most of the villages across the ceasefire line were under attack, and there have been losses on both sides. Yesterday, the Ministry of Defense reported 12 soldiers died on the Azerbaijani side and 18 on the Armenian side. But Azerbaijani Ministry of Defense did say that they've taken 3 villages, and today they're working on strengthening as I mentioned earlier, strengthening the positioning and the protection of the reoccupied territories.
And I mean, internally, how is this going to play in Azerbaijan? I mean, is it going to strengthen the current government, or is this sort of going to be viewed as a humiliation, maybe?
Well, the fact that the Ministry of Defense claims that they've taken back some of the territories is going to play, of course, into the hands of the government. The fact that the ceasefire was violated is no news, and I don't think it's going to have much effect on it. there was a Vox Pop yesterday done by Radio Free Europe, and they were asking people around what they thought about the ceasefire violations, and people actually didn't know what was happening because most of the TV channels were on their normal schedule showing shows and some other things, but not news. So if you ask me what people think in general, I would say yesterday people were quite unaware of what was happening. Today they might be more up to date if the news showed anything. But I think in general, in terms of government's popularity, given the current political context in the country, it is really hard to say that it will definitely benefit the government, because there are many other grievances, the economic crisis and democracy issues and whatnot.
Sure, and let's maybe talk about the external politics here. I mean, does Azerbaijan have any real way of appealing to the West or appealing to regional allies in a meaningful sense, or are they sort of isolated?
In terms of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict?
Sorry.
Or in general?
Oh, I mean, in terms of Nagorno-Karabakh, yeah.
Well, the main message of the Azerbaijani government to the West is that, our territories are occupied and we want this changed. They are trying to work some kind of negotiation with the West, but most of the time, I mean, there was a statement from the State Department yesterday saying that we support the a peaceful resolution to Nagorno-Karabakh. I think whatever it is, whatever appeal that they claim to the West, the West response will always be a peaceful resolution and not a military one. So this is the kind of leverage that they're using. Even though they're saying that our lands are occupied, I think they're getting the same answer over and over again.
Okay, well, thanks for taking the time to talk, Arzu. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Great, thanks a lot. So 25 minutes ago, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project released a massive amount of leaks detailing the offshore companies and funds of some of the world's leaders and top politicians. A lot of the funds are allegedly, I should say, corrupt, but it seems to be one of the biggest leaks in journalistic history. They come from one law firm, a Panamanian firm called Mossack Fonseca. It's an offshore services provider. The documents were received first by a German newspaper called Süddeutsche Zeitung, and they were shared with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalism and the OCCRP, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project.
And we do have with us, and we're very happy to hear Drew Sullivan, who is the editor of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which has broken this story. Hromadske is also the part of it. Drew, thanks a lot and our congratulations. Everybody is really willing to read more and more details. We have this incredible list of the political leaders, but really explain it all. We understand it's very big. So what are the major takes?
Well, I think in our region, this is a global. This is really a global effort that was done by over 100 news organizations. So OCCRP was working in the area of Eastern Europe, the Balkans, and the CIS states. So the big things we're focusing on tonight is looking at Petro Poroshenko and offshores that he set up to move his confectionery business offshore. Avoid Ukrainian taxes and basically put it in a place where it was safe. And then we're also looking at what's going on in Russia, and we're specifically looking at a very interesting guy named Sergei Roldugin, who's an old friend of Putin, who had a number of offshores which moved massive amounts of money between a number of offshore companies, and large Russian oligarchs and businesses paid into these companies, often without making much business sense. Large amounts of money went into his offshore accounts and then went to build palaces for Putin, invest in strategic Russian businesses. And so I think what we're seeing is how common these offshores are and how they're used by the highest levels of our governments.
And Drew, could you give us some background on, how the leak first happened? Did you get all of the data the law firm had to offer? And what did you do once you got the information? What were the steps in reporting?
Sure. The data that we could see went from 1977 all the way to the end of last year, 11.5 million documents. And we became aware of this project when we were invited by ICIJ to participate. They invited us to be kind of their agent to work on the projects in our part of the world. So we don't know where it came from. We don't know anything about the data itself, its origin or anything. All we know that it came from an anonymous source, and it was pretty much a full download of most of what was in one of the largest offshore registration agents in the world, and one that was clearly used by 11 presidents, 29 members of the Forbes richest people of the world, and celebrities, politicians, organized crime figures, and it's going to come out over. This is just a small sample. Every day this week, and probably for months to come, you'll be getting information from this database and from these stories.
And Drew, we really understand that in each country people care about their president, and what is interesting, you have even the people like the president of Iceland, the countries you wouldn't imagine to be in the list. But really, besides Poroshenko and besides Putin, what are the other biggest stories in the region?
Well, to be honest, I've been so busy with our stories, I haven't been paying too much attention to other people's stories. But I think in every single country, there's 35 stories that are being published in Romania. There's a number in Hungary. I think you'll find businessmen and politicians, members of parliament, high-ranking government officials in Russia. We have 3 members of parliament. We have a number of the high-ranking administrative officials who have these offshores. And even though there are laws that say you can't as a member of parliament. So there's stories about, how assistance goes to various countries like Syria, so there's just a huge number. There'll be probably today 200 to 300 stories published.
And I mean, how has the official confirmation process gone? We saw a public statement last week from Putin's spokesman. We saw some public reaction from Poroshenko's people. But generally, how has that process been? Have you gotten any official confirmation, either on the record or on background, from any of the governments that these are about?
Well, it's been very painful, as usual, in dealing with governments and getting information out of them. Most of this information, because this is very specific information and it deals with emails that were sent by lawyers and by agents for these people, it's very difficult to deny this information. And all of it's been corroborated by other records, registration records, by land records, by other things. So what we saw in the documents, we could go and look in our communities and find these companies, and we could find these pieces of land, and we could verify everything that was happening. So it's very difficult for them to deny, that their lawyer asked, to set up a offshore in the name of the president. They can't really deny that. They can just explain it away. And I think you'll see a lot of dancing in the days to come of people trying to put a good spin on what happened.
And Drew, in the end, we still needed time to really digest all that. But what it tells about the world of politics, the world of the big business, so what is the diagnosis, more or less, you would say, after what we've heard and
having looked at many of these records and have edited 30 stories on this, it's ugly. It's really, really ugly. What you see is a large number of people who are going in and evading taxes. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of cases of politicians or businessmen who are wiring monies back and forth between 2 offshore accounts, or 3 offshore accounts. So when you try to find them all, sometimes it's their own, or sometimes it's in another country and you can't track it. This is a huge, dirty world. Where people are not playing fair with the money, and there's a lot of tax evasion, money laundering, and bribery, and this is just one out of thousands and thousands of registration agents. So if what happened in these data is happening just with one registration agent, it's almost scary to see how much our leaders and our businessmen are flaunting offshore companies. They literally are taking a huge part of our economy and depriving us of taxes. In Ukraine, I think it's $10 billion or $11 billion that have been lost in government taxes because of these offshores. And there's no reason to use them except to hide and to steal and to cheat.
Okay, Drew, thanks a lot. And I encourage everybody to follow the hashtag Panama Papers, and all the reports do go to the OCCRP project webpage and to dig into all that thing. And I should also say that today there would be the big story because after in Ukraine, definitely, because our team, our investigative team, Info,
they got access to some of the documents.
Besides that, we are the only one who doing the video report. It would be broadcasted in half an hour right after the show. And I should also add that it will be also broadcasted on the state broadcasting television. So therefore, we simultaneously, Hromadske and the Ukrainian state television broadcast this story together. So I'd like to also ask that you show a bit, to see a piece of the report.
Он настолько далек вообще от жизни, которая происходит в этой стране. Он живет в какой-то своей стране, понимаете?
Я цього року підписав договір про передачу моєї частки в Рошені у незалежний траст, який заснований на моделі сліпого трасту.
Чи у момент передачі активів в управління трасту, чи відбувається якась сплата податків?
Ну, сенсу не було тоді створювати траст.
So that was Slidstvo Hromadski's investigative unit. That was a brief preview of their report. Also some powerful words from Drew Sullivan, the editor of the OCCRP, on the world's global shadow economy and how it's stealing all of our hard-earned, or rather hard-paid tax dollars. And we'll be back in a second.
And there is something else to announce. Also follow, please, on Tuesday. Hromadske will be broadcasting the Bellingcat and the Atlantic Council report on Putin at war in Syria, destruct, deceive, and destroy. So there we have, that would be the report presented by the Bellingcat, a famous organization as well. So there would be John Herbst, Julia Joffe, who is a very good and known reporter on Russia based in the United States currently. So there will be much more investigation with the documents.
We have a lot to look forward to, yeah.
And we'll be back in a second. With a different story, because this Wednesday we have the referendum in the Netherlands. So the Dutch people will go to the polls. I'll definitely have to skip this story. It's not really about Syria. So the Dutch people would go to the polls to vote on the Ukraine-EU Association Agreement.
And you did a couple weeks ago, you did a pretty long report on the opinions of the people of the Netherlands and how they're reacting and associating to this upcoming referendum. That's correct.
So what is very important, it's not a binding referendum. Right. It would be on Wednesday. Before, all the recent data has shown that the people who wants to say no, they would be in majority, but it's still a very little amount of people who will come to the polls. It's very symbolic for Ukraine. It's a very technical document, the EU, this document, but it has become a hot topic in the Netherlands. And we have with us from the Netherlands, Laura Starink, who is a Dutch journalist. She also had written a couple of books on the region and is really, really involved into the campaign. Laura, thanks for being with us with such a late hour. We have really a big day today with all the other stories. So really explain what is the mood in the Netherlands, what we need to know about what's happening in the Netherlands regarding Ukraine.
Well, the campaign is almost ending, of course, because on next Wednesday we have the referendum. The situation looks not too good for the agreement because, according to the polls, the majority of the people that say that they will vote will probably say no to the association agreement. That's what we know now. Today there was a meeting in the center of Amsterdam called Maidan, which was, of course, based on the Euromaidan Square demonstrations. It was not too big, I must say, but the Yes campaign was there very actively promoting a Yes vote. And there were a lot of ministers, also your Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Klimkin, and people from the parliament like Sergei Leshchenko, and others, Dutch politicians of parties who support the Yes vote. But as I said, according to the polls, the no vote is still in the winning mood.
And Laura, I mean, why is that? Why are the no voters getting a larger share? What's the rhetoric behind the no campaign? I mean, why are they winning, essentially?
Well, the problem with this referendum is that a lot of people who are actually in favor of this association agreement with Ukraine, they don't want to go voting because they say the referendum is not straightforward. They don't want to take part in it. A couple of days ago, some of the organizers of the referendum openly acknowledged that the idea behind the referendum had nothing to do with Ukraine, that Ukraine was a coincidence, and that actually this referendum is against the European Union. Some are even openly promoting an exit, like they call it, an exit of the Netherlands from the European Union. And a lot of people who would in principle vote yes, they are angry because they feel cheated and they don't want to take part in this, what they call spectacle. And for the yes campaign, that is quite a problem, because that means that probably a lot of people won't go and won't take part, and that is good news for the no campaign.
And Laura, the last from me. You know, we know that it's not a binding referendum, and if there won't be, enough people coming, they probably won't be taken into account. And also there is somehow the right not to take into account. What should need to happen that the Dutch Parliament would really look at this issue, and really, is it the bigger story now?
Well, there are also people who say that they won't go for a yes vote because they don't want the referendum to trespass the 30% threshold. If less than 30% of the population takes part, it means that it's not valid. If more than 30% will take part, the government has already said, and also members of parliament have said, that they have to do something with the outcome, that they have to take it into account. And this probably means, it doesn't mean the end of the association agreement, because, as you know, Holland is only one of 28 European countries, and it's not possible for us to veto. The other countries won't agree to a veto by the Dutch, probably. But what will probably happen, analysts here say, is that the Dutch government will be obliged to go back to Brussels and to start renegotiate. And that might end up in some extra assurances, like, for instance, that in the near future, Ukraine won't be a member of the European Union, or things like that. So that's the talk here now. That I mean, it doesn't mean the end of the association agreement. As you know, it has already come in. The free trade agreement has already come into effect. So that won't be stopped after Wednesday. But there will probably be some negotiations about adaptations and a sort of clause for Holland to make an exception to the agreement as it is now.
Thank you for taking the time to talk with us, Laura.
Okay.
I appreciate you joining us, and we'll be back in a second with our next segment. So after months of pressure from the West, former Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin is now out after the Rada approved his resignation this past week. And in fact, less than an hour ago, President Petro Poroshenko signed his resignation, meaning he is officially no more, at least as Prosecutor General. He's been accused of not investigating corruption cases, of halting the investigation into who fired the guns in Maidan. And yet, in an act of pretty disgusting irony, his last act as Prosecutor General was to fire the guy you're seeing on the screen right now, David Sakvarelidze, a young prosecutor in charge of Odessa Oblast who was largely seen as a reformer. And that, in a sense, speaks to what kind of person or what kind of Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin was. There was an interesting case with the diamond prosecutors that we were going to talk about.
That's something which had to be explained. So it's definitely that the reform of the General Prosecutor's Office is probably one of the major reforms and one of the hottest topics, because the former prosecutor had been considered to be a darling of the president. But I've sit down with the former Deputy Prosecutor General Vitaly Kasko, who was in charge of international relations, international cooperation, but he was famous here also for his lawyer job during the Maidan. He has resigned in February still. Definitely we also ask not just about, it's always when the people are leaving, they have to speak out against the system which they used to work, but also ask a bit about their responsibility, what they were able to do and what are happening with them. So here it is, this segment with Vitaly Kasko.
The main problem in the office still remains the lack of reforms. It is still Soviet-type prosecution service with all these problems with corruption and high level of corruption and low qualification of prosecutors.
But why the reform hadn't taken place? There are so much talks that is one of the most crucial, if not the most important. Everybody's watching out, the foreign partners, the journalists, all these anti-corruption fighters, but...
There are several reasons why it didn't happen. First of all, there was no political will to reform the prosecution service, and without this political will, it's really hard even to imagine how to reform it in accordance with European standards. Another reason was that leadership of the office and prosecutors who they opposing the reform, they in fact won and didn't even give a chance for the reformers to make the reform successfully. In Ukraine, the Prosecutor General's office is a very important institution, and it's really sad, but again, according to the legislation, the figure of the Prosecutor General is always area of interest of different politicians. It's very dependent on different political influences. For instance, that the Prosecutor General in Ukraine is appointed by the president with the consent of the parliament. And also there is a right of the parliament to vote for non-confidence to the Prosecutor General. And of course, this authority, this power, is used by the politicians to influence the Prosecutor General. Let's imagine there is a criminal case against somebody who is in the sphere of political interest, and the member of parliament is very interested to close this case. This member of parliament can sign the petition to fire the Prosecutor General and come to the Prosecutor General and say that, of course, I can take my signature away, but I need these criminal proceedings to be terminated. And it's only a small example how it is possible.
But now you can say that the former General Prosecutor Shokin had been ousted by the parliament. So there is a progress, or what we can expect?
What we can expect, I think that they can hope for the new Prosecutor General, who can be independent enough to resist to any external influences. In my view, it should be an independent person, and this person should be respected by the legal community in Ukraine, by the people in Ukraine, and by our foreign partners.
Why these Ukrainians are again and again quarreling between themselves, arguing, can't find a common ground in that kind of critical moment. So probably there are a lot of disputes, but it can't be that in all institutions. What would be your answer to that?
I don't think that the situation in the Prosecutor General's office is what, like you said. I think that there are two deputy Prosecutor General who they're trying to change the system, but there was no political will to change the system, and the result, at the moment. If they are talking about political life, unfortunately, this is the traditional picture for Ukrainian society. I was always upset why the democratic political parties which became ruling party in Ukraine, in the end they are just having quarrels and problems with each other. I think that it's very important for the Ukrainian society to find a compromise and to follow the way of reforms finally, because they don't have any other way out in this situation.
What are you going to do?
I'm going to continue my expert and defense lawyers' work, and I will always help any reformers in law enforcement sphere and the prosecution sphere if they want my advice.
And if you'd like to know more details on the issue, on the interview with former Deputy General Prosecutor Kasko, so the full version would be on our webpage and on our social network. You can always go there and log in to read and listen and watch the full versions, and we'll be in a second back with the next segment. And that was a great week for the investigative journalism. So we have another interesting interview this week. We saw the German news magazine Bild, which published an internal Russian government document showing Russian plans for setting up a government in Donbas.
And it's amazing how many documents came out this week. I mean, 11 million with them and more with Bild. It's kind of incredible.
So yeah, there we do see about different people who were in some way connected and taking care of different issues in Donbas connected to the Russian government. You see some of them. So we're speaking about, in generally, 5 ministers. So our colleague Tanya Ogarkova spoke with Julian Ropcke, the author of this investigation, politics editor of the Bild.
Well, Bild obtained a paper from a source within Russia, which we will not elaborate on for security reasons. And this paper is a protocol of the, I have to read this, Interministerial Commission for the Provision of Humanitarian Aid for the affected areas in the southeast of the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk in Ukraine. The paper is a protocol of a meeting or a session from October 23, 2015. And within the paper, there is detailed information on working groups, 6 working groups within this commission, which are run by 5 Russian ministries. Each of the working groups is led by a deputy minister of the Russian Federation and other Russian authorities, like the Customs Authority or the Anti-Monopol Authority. And these different working groups deal with topics like finance and tax law, trade with energy sources, and transportation infrastructure. And from these subjects, you can already hear that this goes far beyond a humanitarian mission. This is what you need to run a state, to run a welfare system, to run an infrastructure system, and also to run the financial policy, domestic policy, as well as foreign policy of the affected areas in eastern Ukraine. But what we can say is that the FSB, the security service of Russia, is overlooking every group of the commission and is working with it. So there is a security aspect in it. Let's put it this way, and an aspect in it, so to say, of intelligence. But there is no direct military involvement in this commission.
How could we be sure that the decisions of this government are implemented by local authorities in Donetsk and Lugansk? How could we know what additional proof could exist about that?
Well, as you know, first of all, we have published a big report in January this year that Russia is funneling around 1 billion euros per year in social payments like pensions and public sector to the Ukrainian territories. So this is a strong indication that there is someone working behind the scenes and someone is making the decisions who to pay with what kind of money. On the other side, you asked how they make sure these decisions are implemented. Well, I think we talk about purely puppet governments of the DNR and the LNR. In the Commission, there is a list of the total governments of these so-called governments of the two republics. But as we know, they were only informed about the decisions taken. And as you can imagine, they have simply no other chance than to do exactly what is decided in Russia. To keep their states running, to keep their for example, public transport running. There is trains, buses and trams which are planned and systems which are planned also in the Commission.
And another important question, because you conclude your paper saying that Minsk agreements are kind of show for Western Europe that Russia is playing because the plan behind it is surely quite a frozen conflict, etc. Do you think that there will be a reaction from European countries to your paper, I mean to your investigation, because it's quite serious as well for Europe as well?
So we cannot say, of course, if there will be a reaction. As we stated in our article, if you take this finding serious, then you have two aspects you have to consider when you think about Minsk. The first one is that Russia obviously developed a plan B, an own perspective, an own future for Donbas, which has nothing to do with Minsk, which has nothing to do with the re-implement or the midterm reintegration of the Donbas into Ukrainian statehood. The second is that there are many European politicians, also German politicians right now, demanding Ukraine to change its constitution and to implement a law to have democratic elections in the occupied part of the Donbas. And the point is, if you know that the politicians, that the ministers, the deputy ministers, which are actually running and deciding about the future of Donbas, are not located within Ukraine but in Moscow, then this leads an election to the absurd. So in this regard, the people in Donbas, even if they had the right to vote, they couldn't vote for the politicians deciding on their future.
Mm-hmm. I see. So you expect a kind of reaction from European side, like probably Minsk agreements would be revised or something like that, because I mean, political class in Europe will be conscious about the real situation in DNR and LNR.
Again, I cannot say that we expect anything, or we didn't see any reaction from Europe so far. We saw lots of reactions from the Canadian ambassador to Ukraine, from the US ambassador to Ukraine, which chaired the report and which also said this is a must-read, this is important. However, we have no reaction from Europe so far, from European politicians. And I can only repeat myself. If you take this finding serious, you have to implement further measures to make sure Russia sticks to the Minsk agreement. If you say it's not so important that what is written in Minsk is also implemented, then you don't have to react to the report.
So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch tonight. My name is Josh Kovensky. I'm a reporter at the Kyiv Post. You can follow the Kyiv Post for anything about Ukraine and the region around in print, and you can follow Hromadske for Ukrainian language, English language, and Russian language coverage of Ukraine and the world around.
And we are coming back to our big story of today. As we know, the consortium of the investigative journalists, the Global Consortium, has published this huge story about the Panama Papers, that is the hashtag about the offshores and how they are used by the many world leaders, politicians. You can go to the page, Panama Papers.
All of them using one law firm, which is in itself somewhat shocking. That, 11 million documents in one law firm revealing, hundreds of people, the upper echelons of governments around the world. It's kind of staggering.
So it's panamapapers.icij.org, but simultaneously many papers worldwide had published the stories on their leaders. So Hromadske has done it in Ukrainian, obviously, and in Russian as well. It's part of the story. This on our webpage, there is already the story on the President Poroshenko's secret offshore deals revealed. So it's int.hromadske.tv. There you can go and see all these documents. But what is the most interesting for us, our investigative teams, Lidstvo.info, had also filmed the story. So we are looking that in a couple minutes, simultaneously with the state broadcasting company of Ukraine, we are starting this project. You have a chance to watch it in English while it's broadcasted in Ukrainian, and also in our Russian webpage. You can also do that and see also the visuals, not just the text.
Right, and they did some pretty interesting interviews where they went and you'll see it very soon, but where they went and spoke with some people from the presidential administration, from some lawyers who really know how this stuff works. It's a pretty fascinating thing.
And that was also interesting that it was not very easy to catch up the president for, in particular, Hromadske investigative team, though, for instance, today he was given the interview for 3 mainstream channels. So that topic wasn't really covered that well. And please, I'd like to, before we start in more or less than a minute or two, please stay with us. Also see how it will look like.
Он настолько далек вообще от жизни, которая происходит в этой стране. Он живет в какой-то своей стране, понимаете?
Я цього року підписав договір про передачу моєї частки в Рошені у незалежний траст, який заснований на моделі сліпого трасту.
Чи у момент передачі активів в управління трасту, чи відбувається якась сплата податків?
Сенсу не було тоді створювати траст.
У серпні 2014-го українцям було страшно слухати новини, особливо тим, чиї близькі воювали на Донбасі. 4 військових загинули, 23 поранено. 12 військових загинули, 19 поранено. Такими даними з зони бойових дій починалися випуски новин. Щодня загиблі, поранені і зниклі безвісти. Тими днями за Україну переживали й у столиці Кіпру Нікосії. У понеділок, 4 серпня, працівник кіпрської фірми Ropcke Christostomides & Co. Георг Йоанноу почав свою роботу з листа на сонячну Тортолу, Британські Віргінські острови. Пан Йоанноу запропонував колегам з компанії-реєстратора фірм Mossack Fonseca & Co. співпрацю у створенні нової BVI-компанії. Він зазначив, що власник компанії – людина, задіяна у політиці.
Фірма буде холдинговою компанією для його бізнесу і не матиме нічого спільного з його політичною діяльністю.
Фірма Mossack Fonseca & Co., яка є одним з найбільших у світі масових реєстраторів офшорних компаній, відповіла пану Йоанноу, що готова до співпраці та потребує деталей про акціонера.
офшори, Британські Вірджинські острова, Панаму, там, Малту і так далі, де дуже гнучкі і прості закони про управління майном, реєстрації компаній і зберігається максимальна таємничість і мінімальну податковість.
У серпні 2014-го найгарячішою точкою на Донбасі був Іловайськ. Це місто на схід від Донецька, крупний залізничний вузол. Саме через нього сепаратисти отримували підкріплення і зброю з Росії. Втрата Іловайська розсікла б контрольовану ними територію навпіл і відрізала б від лінії постачання Донецьк та значну частину Донецької області. Командування вирішило розпочати так звану Іловайську операцію.
Іловайськ потрібно було брати. По большому счету, на той момент Іловайськ можна було брати.
Боєць з позивним «Гал» пам'ятає штурм Іловайська практично погодинно. 18 серпня його добровольчий батальйон «Донбас» зачистив свою частину міста і розташувався у приміщенні школи. Донбасівці допомогли розташуватися й іншим українським з'єднанням.
В школі розполагався батальйон «Донбас». То ли 20 числа или 21-го мы собрали силы, расчистили территорию до железной дороги и разместили все эти прибывшие батальоны в детском садике. Они там пробыли 1 день и были оттуда выбиты. С сепаратистами вернулись в школу. После этого бой длился около 6 часов. Силами, к сожалению, только в батальоне «Донбас».
Новини з офшорної тортули тими днями приходили значно приємніші. 21 серпня у реєстрах BVI з'явилася нова фірма з українським корінням. Її назвали Prime Asset Partners Limited. Єдиним власником компанії вказаний громадянин України Петро Порошенко з адресою реєстрації місто Київ, вулиця Грушевського, 9, квартира 37. Доданий до листування закордонний паспорт з фотографією не залишає сумнівів, що йдеться про президента України Петра Порошенка.
За моєю спиною будинок на вулицю Грушевського у Києві, який вказаний у реєстраційних документах BVI. Зараз ми перевіримо, чи дійсно це домашня адреса президента. Схоже, що це з 2 квартир зроблена одна, тому що однакові двері і туди ніяк не подзвонити. Ніхто не відчиняє, напевно, президент на роботі. Добрий день. А ми в 37-му квартиру, там нікого нема? Ніхто ніколи не приходить, так? Ні, не приходить. А ви знаєте, хто там живе?
Ну, так.
Знаєте?
Звісно, жили вони там, а зараз вони не живуть. Хто жив? Ну, ви ж знаєте, чого сюди прийшли.
З 25 серпня по 1 вересня триває активне листування між Тортолою та ще одним островом – Кіпром. У результаті директоркою новоствореної фірми Петра Порошенка призначають кіпріотку Ольгу Георгіову. Фірма-реєстратор Mossack Fonseca з'ясовує деталі, ставить багато питань. Адже такий поважний клієнт з'являється не щодня. У листуванні Петра Порошенка називають то президентом, то прем'єр-міністром України. В останні дні серпня на сході України розгортаються трагічні події, які згодом назвуть Іловайським котлом. Українські бійці потрапляють в оточення з російських військових.
Все это время мы подвергались обстрелам сначала из автоматических гранатометов, потом минометы, потом начали нас обстреливать грады, тяжелая артиллерия. Такая была тяжелая ситуация, что просто не подбирали убитых, не было возможности подбирать убитых. Многие сгорели просто в автомобилях.
Батальйон «Донбас» вимагав у президента Порошенка негайно втрутитися у ситуацію. В Київ йшли тривожні повідомлення всіма можливими каналами зв'язку, під кінець уже й відкритими. Та поки українські солдати гинули, центр мовчав.
Оці звернення, вони мали якийсь результат, на вашу думку? Чи президент звернув після цього увагу на те, що відбувається?
Да, конечно. Был проведен парад.
Війна проти зовнішньої агресії. За Україну. За її волю. За честь і славу. За народ.
Войска, которые проходили парад, они могли быть в Иловайске. На прорыв кольца, знаете, кого отправили? 350 молодых бойцов, которые там и легли. Ну это что? Ну это просто убийство. Понимаете?
Зранку 1 вересня з Кіпру на BVI йде важливий лист з вкладеним документом. Це сплачений чек на 14 гривень 85 копійок за електроенергію, використану Петром Порошенком на вулицю Грушевського, 9, квартира 37. Цей чек був підтвердженням, що адреса бенефіціара є справжньою. Також реєстратори з BVI просять надати 2 листи про благонадійність Петра Порошенка. Перший – з банку, у якому власник новоствореної офшорки є клієнтом не менше 2 років. Другий – від юриста, який обслуговує пана Порошенка. Реєстраторам з Mossack Fonseca довелося нагадувати про ці листи кілька разів.
Отже, на початку вересня 2014 року у Петра Порошенка було 2 проблеми. Перша – бізнесова – як оперативно оформити листи про благонадійність. Друга – державна – як розібратися з тим, що сталося в Іловайську. Лише за півроку з'явиться офіційна статистика Іловайської трагедії. 459 загиблих, 478 поранених та 180 полонених. Процес визволення останніх затягнеться на місяці. Листи про благонадійність, звісно ж, напишуть швидше. Як ви думаєте, президент володів ситуацією, що відбувається в Іловайську?
Вы знаете, у меня глубокое убеждение, что те люди, которые попадают вот на такие посты, они уходят в какой-то перпендикулярный мир. Либо сами, либо их окружение, которое выдает им какую-то информацию, которую им выгодно или не любят услышать. Ну, мне кажется, он настолько далек вообще от жизни, которая происходит в этой стране. Он живет в какой-то своей стране, понимаете?
2 жовтня кіпріот Георг Йоанноу нарешті пересилає працівникам Mossack Fonseca довідку від українського ТОВ «Авелум Партнерс», яка підтверджує, що компанія знає Петра Порошенка з 2012 року та задоволена співпрацею з ним. До цієї юридичної фірми ми ще повернемося та дізнаємося, наскільки їй довіряє сам президент України. 17 жовтня реєстратори з BVI отримують довідку з банку, у якій йдеться про порядність українського президента.
Петро Порошенко є клієнтом публічного акціонерного товариства «Міжнародний інвестиційний банк» з 25 лютого 2009 року. Ми підтверджуємо, що всі рахунки були проведені суб'єктом відповідно до вимог банку.
Це центральний офіс банку, який гарантував порядність бізнесмена Порошенка. Відповідь на наш запит звідси ми не отримали. Напевне, трохи незручно відповідати на питання журналістів, коли йдеться не лише про клієнта, а й про власника банку. Адже, згідно офіційної інформації, Петро Олексійович Порошенко досі його власник.
17 жовтня, коли юристи з BVI отримали довгоочікуваний лист з банку, Юлія Титарчук з Чернігова отримала дуже погані новини.
Мінометний обстріл це був. Поранення було оба легких пробиті, желудок, і печінка, і кишечник, і багато все, майже все. 17-го зранку зателефонували, сказали, що все, не треба нікуди їхати, тому що він вже в 6 утра, серце зупинилося.
Чоловікові Юлії було 46 років. Він загинув, захищаючи Донецький аеропорт. Володимир Титарчук – один з тих, кого за відвагу назвали кіборгами.
Чесно, так уже вона набридла, ця війна. Вже стільки втрат, і воно ж не закінчується. Скільки дітей без батьків залишилося.
За кілька днів після загибелі Володимира Титарчука президент Порошенко посмертно нагородив загиблого кіборга орденом.
Українські герої, визнання тої ціни, який український народ...
Увечері 20 лютого 2015 року Петро Порошенко виступав перед родинами Небесної Сотні та запалював промені гідності.
І як би не було складно, які б ще випробування не випали на нашу долю, я обіцяю вам, я викладуся до максимуму, щоб ті великі жертви, які за останній рік поніс наш народ, не виявилися змарнованими.
Того ж таки 20 лютого на Тортолі працівники Mossack Fonseca вирішили змінити статус компанії Порошенка Prime Asset Partners Limited з огляду на високий статус директора компанії. Відтепер увага до неї буде пильнішою.
На додачу до звичайних речей ми маємо перевіряти, яка ситуація в Україні, чи немає корупційних скандалів.
Також юристка наполягає, щоб у документах було зазначено, який тип бізнесу вестиме Prime Asset Partners Limited. Кіпріот Георг Йоанноу швидко відповідає.
Prime Asset обслуговує холдинг компаній Кіпру та українських компаній Рошен Груп, одного з найбільших виробників кондитерської продукції в Європі.
У грудні 2015-го кіпріот Георг Йоанноу просить колег з Тортоли терміново зібрати всі наявні документи і відправити у Швейцарію кур'єром. Адресатом зазначено Мартіну Н. Бастел з Rothschild Trust. На цьому листування закінчується. Отже, ми не знаємо, чи пішли ці документи у Цюрих і з якою метою. Та вже на початку 2016 року Петро Порошенко заявляє, що передав свої активи у керування сліпому трасту.
Я цього року підписав договір про передачу моєї частки в Рошені у незалежний траст, який заснований на моделі сліпого трасту.
Протягом місяця ми намагалися отримати офіційний коментар президента. Поки адміністрація готувала відповіді на наші запити, ми робили спроби поговорити з президентом на публічних заходах. На жаль, безрезультатно. Тим часом ми отримали відповідь з президентської канцелярії. Щодо усіх питань стосовно офшору на BVI, нам порадили звертатися до уже знайомої нам фірми Avellum Partners. Спочатку там здивувалися, але згодом разом з партнерами з ICU відповіли на наше питання. Ця відповідь, на жаль, ані трохи не виправдовує президента. По-перше, жодного трасту не існує – сліпого чи будь-якого іншого. Коли президент Порошенко заявляє, що підписав угоду про передачу туди своїх активів, то каже неправду. Судячи з відповіді юристів, траст і досі лишається наміром, бо про нього говорять винятково у майбутньому часі.
Фактична передача активів у траст вимагає дотримання значної кількості юридичних формальностей. На даний момент юридичний радник забезпечує дотримання таких формальностей.
По-друге, Порошенко створив компанію на BVI для того, щоб таки продати Рошен.
Prime Asset Partners Limited було засновано влітку 2014 року в ході проведення корпоративної реструктуризації, яка була підготовчою стадією для подальшого продажу групи Рошен. На практиці використання аналогічних структур є типовим для українського бізнесу. В цій структурі Prime Asset Partners Limited є виключно технічною компанією.
Юристи пояснюють, мовляв, в Україні так роблять усі. Тому й президент президент виводить свої активи в офшорну зону, де податок на продаж дорівнює нулю. По-третє, юристи підтвердили, що пан Порошенко є єдиним акціонером офшору на BVI та пояснили, що з ним буде далі.
Частка у Рошен перейде у траст після завершення усіх юридичних формальностей.
Ми попросили міжнародного юриста прокоментувати нюанси отриманої інформації. Чи можна український актив передати в траст? В іноземний?
Залежить від обставин. В принципі, я не бачу проблеми.
Чи у момент передачі активів в управління трасту, чи відбувається якась сплата податків?
Ну, сенсу не було тоді створювати траст. В принципі, воно якраз і дозволяється, бо гроші не оподатковуються.
Коли йдеться про гроші, президент України готовий відверто порушувати закон. У декларації за 2014 рік він взагалі не зазначив, що створив компанію за кордоном. У відповіді його юристів читаємо таке.
Акції Prime Asset Partners Limited не мають номінальної вартості. Відповідно до вимог щодо декларування майна у 2014 році, включенню до декларації підлягала інформація про акції, які мають номінальну вартість.
Юристи Порошенка кажуть неправду. Ось документ, який підтверджує, що президент є власником 1000 акцій, кожна з яких коштує $1 США. А ось його декларація, де в пункті «Розмір внесків до статутних капіталів підприємства, у тому числі за кордоном», стоїть прочерк. Отже, тепер ми маємо документальні підтвердження, що угода про структуру, куди президент України нібито передав свої кондитерські активи, досі не підписана. Любий Порошенку сліпий траст існує лише в його фантазіях. У реальному житті президент створив компанію в офшорній зоні на Британських Віргінських островах, куди вивів активи Рошену, щоб не сплачувати в Україні податків з продажу. А обгортка у вигляді трасту мала б приховати весь процес. Очевидно, за задумом, ніхто так і не мав дізнатися, який саме Рошен продають – український чи острівний.
Ми досі не розуміємо, чому активна фаза перебудови Порошенком своєї кондитерської корпорації збіглася з найтрагічнішими подіями в новітній історії України. Ми також не знаємо, чи заважав цей процес голові держави виконувати свої функції. Та в цих подіях чітко простежуються дві паралельні лінії – українців, які ціною власного життя боронили Україну, та президента, який у той же час видумував хитромудрі фінансові конструкції, як би не платити податків своїй державі.